If you lost it all, would you be able to bounce back and do the work necessary to obtain financial freedom? In this episode, we get to hear from Chris Miles, who has lost big, but was able to bounce back and gain financial freedom. Let's get started so that you can learn how to do the same.
Are you a working professional but struggling to balance the workload of your career, family, obligations, and preparing for your financial future? If so, this podcast is for you. You've spent years learning your craft, and now it's time to focus on your financial future. This podcast will teach you what you need to retire wealthy and happy. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Retire Wealthy and Happy podcast. Today we have with us the totally awesome Chris Miles, who's known as the anti-financial advisor. He teaches and coaches and has been very successful. Let's welcome Chris Miles to the podcast.
Good morning, Chris.
Hey. Good morning. Glad you guys have me on. It's totally awesome morning, isn't it?
Maybe a little cold, but we're glad to have you here.
I know. Well, at least you got us all snowed in, so we have to do something like a podcast to kill time before we get unburied.
That's right.
Before we spend the rest of our day digging out of the snow.
Exactly. You get us more happy and fresh.
For anybody that's not in Utah, as of the other day, we were digging out somewhere between 6 and 50 inches, and all of Facebook land was nothing but digging out snow, and there's still more to dig out. Mm-hmm. Which we'll probably edit out because it's not going to be evergreen. Chris, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and tell us your story?
Yeah, like you mentioned, I was an anti-financial advisor. People are thinking like, what's an anti-financial advisor, right? Well, pretty much it means anything that financial advisors teach, I think is for the most part, right? Unlike, most financial advisors, like my shirt says right here, is, I love passive income, right? And, now, I wasn't always that way. I mean, when I was raised by my parents, they were hardworking parents, taught me good values. But the one thing they didn't really teach me a lot about was money. And I remember my dad, if anything, you talk about money, it was always about the scarcity of it, right? It was things like, hey, I can't afford this. What do you think I am, made of money? Money doesn't grow on trees, And then my favorite one, although it's kind of depressing, was he would say, Chris, I'm going to work until I'm dead. Like, I'm going to work this job forever, and then it will probably literally kill me. And I said, well, that's not the life I want. I don't want to follow that kind of example, do I? So instead, I ended up saying, all right, that's it. I'm going to do what my family never did, which is go to college, and like Napoleon Diamond says, or Kip says, your mom goes to college, right? I went to college, went there. And in my fourth year, I was planning on becoming a business consultant. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, shouldn't I have real life business experience? Because I've been taught from a young age that you practice what you preach, right? So I dropped out of college with one class to go, took what was supposed to be a 1-year sabbatical. And I said, all right, what kind of entrepreneurial venture can I do? Well, the first thing that came up that was semi-interesting was becoming a financial advisor, because I was kind of like, Kevin Nealon when he's sitting down with Adam Sandler at the bank in The Wedding Singer. You remember that when Adam Sandler's trying to get a job and he says, well, tell me about your experiences. He's like, well, I like money. I have a jar on top of my refrigerator. I like to add more to it. That's where you come in, sir. That kind of thing. That's kind of what I was like. I was like, I've took a few banking and accounting classes, but I really don't know much about money. So they hired me because if you have a clean criminal record, you can pass a test, anybody can become a financial advisor, right? Anybody, legitimately. So I started doing that. And then after a few years, the next thing I know, my dad, now the tables turn, he says, Chris, I want you to talk and advise me. What would you help me to do? So I went to his house, sat down at that same kitchen table he was giving me all of his scarcity money advice about, right? And as we sat there, and you got to understand my dad, like he is like the Dave Ramsey poster child. In fact, he's probably the older brother that Dave Ramsey looked up to, because I think Dave Ramsey learned from my dad, because he was penny pinching all the time, right? He was very known as being cheap. He was also the guy that saved everything, and he was happy he paid off his debt early. This guy was debt free, was packing money into his 401k. I sit down with him and I say, Dad, here's the thing: you're 61 years old. If you want to retire today, you better hope you die in 5 years, because that's how much money you have. It's 5 years worth of money, and then you're out. Other than Social Security, right? And he said, well, that's not what I want to hear. What do I do? I said, I don't know, because you did everything right. You did everything that a financial advisor is supposed to, that tells you it's supposed to do. You saved your money in your 401k, got your match and everything. You paid off all your debt. You're living the dream for a financial advisor, yet it's not enough. And it bugged me. It bugged the heck out of me. And I remember I had a friend that was in real estate investing, and he challenged me. It was just a few weeks later. He says, Chris, how many of your clients are truly financially free where they don't worry about money? And I said, well, not worrying about money? Let me think about these retired physicians. None, because they all worry about money. They're all worried about running out of money, just like my dad was. Okay, great. Good job, Chris. How about this? How many of you guys as financial advisors are able to retire not off the commissions you're earning from selling this stuff that apparently hasn't worked, but you're actually able to retire doing the investments? And as I started looking at, there's like over 100 guys that worked in my office, even guys that have been working there since the late 1970s, yet none of them were in a place where they could retire. And even the guy I thought they could retire, I just saw him on LinkedIn recently. He got fired from his job as a financial advisor, was quickly looking for a job in solar. So he's selling solar now. The guy is still not financially free. And it's been now almost 20 years since I quit being a financial advisor. So needless to say, nobody is retiring as a financial advisor. Not truly, not without those commissions coming in. And it was a big epiphany, because I realized, well, if it hasn't worked for them, it's not working for us. Well, it's pretty much proven this does not work. And I had a choice. Either I could put my blinders on, like many of my friends do, and they're good people that work in this industry still. And they do it. And they do it because they felt handcuffed, because they make anywhere from $500,000 to several $1 million a year with their assets under management, with their clientele. If they quit, they lose all that money. So they're stuck there, and they could just put blinders on saying, well, I don't want to see that truth. Don't even show me. Or I do the latter, which is I quit and I keep my integrity intact, and I did the latter. I ended up being a mortgage broker in 2006, which was easy to be a mortgage broker back then, and started doing that. And it was interesting, because just a matter of months later, I started to want to know how to do it. And that's where I started connecting with my friends that were in real estate investing that actually were financially independent, some in their 20s and 30s, started going that route. And later that year, I was able to become financially independent myself, 28, almost 29 years old. And that's where, after I came out of retirement, then teach people how to do that ever since.
Chris, thanks for sharing your story with us. I took a couple pieces of, I'd call them nuggets out of that information. The first is we don't learn. The question, the thought is, where do we learn our financial knowledge, right? Because you're saying your parents weren't really teaching it to you. And if they were, it wasn't maybe the best information. And I'm thinking, well, we're not learning it in the schools. Like, school isn't teaching us that. So where are we actually learning it? And the answer is you almost have to teach yourself. You have to go out and be willing to ask the right questions and to gather so that you can make good financial choices. And the second thing I took from what you said is that we need to be really careful who we get that information from, or who we're taking our financial advice from, because like you're saying, there's financial advisors that aren't in a position themselves to be financially free.
That's
so
right.
If they're the ones giving you advice, you have to really think through that and be like, why would I listen to them if they're not able to accomplish what it is you're the goal? I mean, assuming that's the goal
you want to accomplish.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's true.
It sounds like a classic case of do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. Yeah, it's prevalent. I mean, and that's the problem, is that everybody's been taught, right? Just because something is mainstream doesn't mean it's true. In fact, if you really look at what mainstream media and mainstream people believe, it's usually the opposite is true, isn't it? Like, for example, milk does a body good, pass it on. We all learned that was a bunch of crap, right? It doesn't do a body any good, and it just makes you inflamed and unhealthy, right? It makes you sick. But hey, commercialism taught us milk is one of those standard food group items you got to have, right? And you got to have lots and lots of bread. And then we got people, they got leaky gut syndrome and stuff, right? Like, we can't even stay healthy because of all this freaking, inflammation we're getting from bread, from eating too much of that, It's the same thing with money. We've been taught by financial advisors, and they're taught by financial institutions. If you really go up the chain, it's banks and other financial companies like the Merrill Lynches and the Prudentials, right? All those guys, Goldman Sachs, Fidelity, they're just teaching them how to sell crap, okay? They're teaching them how to sell a bill of goods, a certain amount of products, as they call them, And that's what they pass on to you. And they pass on as being expert advice. But the problem is, once again, it has been proven not to work. The S&P 500, I used to teach people it was 10, 12%, right? 10% for large cap stocks, 12% average for small cap. And I pulled that Ibbotson chart, from like 1927 all the way till through history, and the value of the dollar till today. And, real estate's only 3%. It's barely keep up with inflation. But look at this, the stock market's going through the roof. That $1 turned into $20,000, right? Which is a bunch of, okay? Because I'll tell you, if you really look at the real rate of return, even the stock market in the last 30 years, like the actual yield average of that is only about 7.6 to 7.7%, not 10% plus. Okay. You put that number into like 30, 40 years out and watch what happens. You'll realize that the money you thought you would have wouldn't. Give an example. I don't want to pick on our good friend Dave Ramsey, but I'm going to do it anyways, because I don't believe he should live on rice and beans. And, although he's a good-hearted guy, bless his Tennessee heart, he just, the problem is he's kind of judgmental and calls everybody stupid all the time, right? But the truth is he kind of teaches stupid stuff too. Once you go beyond budgeting and saving, right? When you try to go into investing and financial freedom, he doesn't teach you anything. For example, I know that he put a Twitter post out there. I actually have a copy of it where he said, if you save $100 a month for 40 years, earning 12% in the market, you will have it was like $1.17 million, I think it was, right? Well, here's the problem with that. First and foremost, one, if you do the math, 40 years, $100 a month at 12% doesn't give you $1.17 million. It was like $1.176 million to be exact. It actually came up to be $200,000 less. It was $976,000 instead. So one, he got the number wrong. So he did wrong math somehow. Number two, if you put in, even like 7.5%, which is really good, if you even get that high return in your mutual funds with your, whether you're doing the IRAs or your 401ks or whatever, 7.5%, you put that number in, that number becomes more like 250,000. So you go from thinking, I'm going to become a millionaire, save $100 a month, which I taught as a financial advisor 20 years ago, to all of a sudden saying, oh, good luck, you got $250,000. And by the way, in 40 years, what's $250,000 going to be worth anyways? Nothing. Even the 401k match, every time I've run those numbers, whatever somebody puts in per year, when you factor in inflation, that's exactly what you can live off of on the traditional financial model of living on 3%, not 4%. That rule's been debunked 20 years ago, but the 3% rule, which is like the new rule. Well, if you put in $20,000 a year, max funding your 401k, guess what? You're going to live on $20,000 a year. What kind of life is that?
Especially in the future, right? Probably not very good at all.
Well, that's a $20,000 a year adjusted for inflation type of future. Yeah. So it's still going to have that kind of lifestyle. So why am I not getting ahead? I'm just putting it away for someday. I'm working hard to then just not work hard later. But, it really doesn't buy you that much time. No, that's what happened with my dad. That's what's happening with now tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans here in the near till later future.
Well, Chris, you've definitely got my interest piqued, and I hope we get into what we should actually be doing in this episode.
No, you can't hear that stuff. I'm just going to teach you like Robert Kiyosaki does and teach you nothing about actually how to do it.
Well, maybe before we jump in there, Roger, do you want to ask the other questions and then we'll come back to it?
Yeah, if we're going to go down the Robert Kiyosaki line, if you'd like to buy my $25,000 program, why don't you come to the back of the room and we'll sell it right now. We're just going to pause this while you go and pay.
That's right.
So now that we know what not to do, what should we do?
Yeah, the thing that we should do is actually look at alternative investments, right? And I know you guys talk about this all the time. You do it, you live it yourselves. And that's why I love being on these kind of shows, because you guys get it. And we are the minority. Although when it comes to success, percentage of success, we are the majority, right? You look at the Americans today. I just looked at the number recently. There's about 25 million millionaires in the United States of America, which is about a 7 to 8% population of the population, right? One thing we all have in common as millionaires is that we have real estate. Sometimes people just have their own house and they can be a millionaire because, hey, you can be in California, it's possible. But if you look at every single situation, most of them have at least one home, in many cases, multiple properties. But what you'll have a hard time finding, and I know because I tried doing this search before last year when I did a podcast called The Case Against Mutual Funds, where I did like a court case, in a sense, against mutual funds. And guess what? It is dang hard to find people that have millions inside their 401ks. I found some people that did it, but it's actually not that encouraging because most of the time the money didn't come from inside the 401k growing. It came from some outside source that they then threw into their IRAs, right? But yeah, I mean, look at it. Like real estate is the thing that really is the answer. Now, it doesn't have to be the traditional way that most people do. And I know Roger and I were talking about this off air before, where a lot of times people just think, I'm going to buy it in my backyard. And if you're a good active investor, you could probably find a good deal. You could probably buy something undervalued. But it's challenging because a lot of people that we talk to are usually, high paid, employees, maybe they're like managers, they're entrepreneurs, and they just got their own business that keeps them distracted a little bit. They don't have the time that they want to go and try to put into finding that perfect deal. But, I can go find properties somewhere in another part of the country and I don't have to find them. A lot of times I can have other companies help me find them, almost bring the buffet to me. And then I can, like turnkey real estate, for example, I can go and find properties in Alabama, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, of all places. More than the Clintons come out of Arkansas, believe it or not. Find places out in the Midwest and the Southeast where the cash flows are great versus where I live here in Utah, and you guys do too. It's dang hard to find good cash flowing properties. You're better almost to flip it or do short-term rentals, right? Which is more of a business, almost a side hustle than it is a passive stream of income. And that's great if you want to do that. But again, if you lack the time or the energy, and you're like, I just can't handle this. I'm going to ruin this business if I do it. Great. Well, there's passive options. So like turnkey real estate's one great option. And heck, in the last 4.5 years, I had a property in Tennessee that did a 300% total return, including cash on cash returns, where the actual cash flow I'm getting after I pay my property manager. So I don't do any property management at all. I did that before the last recession. I sucked at it. So I don't do any property management at all. I have that all outsourced. I just get the checks, also with appreciation, which always helped, of course, in the last few years, even with, not even counting the tax benefits, right? Even the fact that they're paying down my mortgage for me, my renters are, right? All these things, when you put those together, it's like a 300% rate of return I had in the last 4.5 years. When I went back and looked at the S&P 500 at the same time, when I got into that property, I would have had about a 45% rate of return. So I'm like, well, 45 versus 300, I think I win, right? It's so much different. It's so different. And that's not the only place. Of course, there's like syndications, right? You can go and pool your money with other investors and go into a specific deal where somebody else operates and manages that apartment building. It could be self-storage units. It could be a portfolio of short-term rentals, although we're going more into funds, right? And there's funds like that too, where there's like lending funds. You can lend money to people and they'll pay you better interest rates than the bank will by far. You can make double-digit returns lending your money to investors and things like that. There's so many ways to make it, even a 10+% return on your money. I mean, one of my best ones right now is actually raw land. I have a business partner where they're doing all the work. I'm the financer and we're splitting 70-30. I get 70, they get 30. And we're making about, $6,000+ a month on just less than a few $100,000 invested, So, I mean, that's fun, that kind of stuff. So there's so many options in this alternative space. It's like the freaking Matrix, taking the pill, right? It's like you open up this entire world that you never knew was there, including me as a financial advisor. Never knew it was there. And in fact, as a financial advisor, to be honest, I didn't want to know it's there because I wanted people to invest with me, not invest in places where I don't get paid commissions. And that's the truth with financial advisors. They're going to recommend you, even if you're a square peg, they're going to try to fit you in that stupid square hole of theirs. And it doesn't work, right? So you got to make sure you're doing the right things and you're doing it the right way. And I'm telling you, there's way more success doing these kind of alternative investments like real estate than anything else.
You also mentioned that you're into oil and gas.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Explain what an oil and gas investment is for somebody that doesn't know anything about it.
There's several types out there. I tend to shy away from the speculative stuff. I got burned so bad in the last recession that I kind of went ultra conservative, right? Whenever somebody tells me, like, they hear my stuff and they're like, well, Chris, I heard you on the Money Ripples podcast and what you talk about sounds really kind of risky. I'm more conservative. I do my 401k. I'm like, you're a freaking gambler if you're using their 401k or an IRA. If you're in mutual funds, you're taking way more risk than I am. At least I have an asset. What do you have? Something you think is an asset. It's an arbitrary thing called a stock, right? That doesn't even count as an asset. It's barely an asset. So for me, like, when I look at oil and gas, there are a lot of speculative things you can be doing, and I shy away from those. Speculative things would be like in the technology arena, right? There's different types of equipment and stuff that people can build and sell or lease to companies. And so it's almost like a business partnership. There's like a business component with oil and gas. There's drilling. Drilling can actually give you a lot of tax benefits, but again, it's solely based on production. So if you end up coming dry, you literally come up dry, financially speaking, too. The way I like to use it is more in the area of like land leasing with mineral rights, where the oil company is paying you for the use of the land, right? So they're essentially renting from you, like a landlord, in a sense, but they're doing all the work. They're drilling, but they're also sharing the royalties of those mineral rights that they pull up, usually oil and natural gas. So you get paid on the minerals, and you get paid on the land for them using it. So you get paid for both. It's almost like someone doing a triple net lease, in real estate, right? But it's dealing with oil fields. So that's more the route I like to take, because I get that extra safety of having the land, but also getting the upside on the drilling too.
Are those generally structured as like a private offering, or how do you find opportunities like that?
Yeah, a lot of times they can be in syndicated private offerings and things like that. Yeah, you definitely can find those out there.
Cool.
You also do it with infinite banking, do you not?
Yeah, absolutely.
So before you go there, I have a question that will help here as well. So before this episode, I was watching a lot of Chris's videos to prepare, and I found something called the Introduction to Infinite Banking, which is an 18 video series that I found on his Facebook page. So if you want to get into, or at least know more about infinite banking, he has a great series you can find on his Facebook page, but I'm hoping he'll give us a summary of that in today's episode. So Chris, can you tell us a little bit about infinite banking?
Yeah, it's really setting up what's called what I refer to as a tax-free supercharged savings account, right? Now, the vehicle you use is using whole life insurance. You don't use universal life. There's some risks to doing that. I used to love using universal life or term insurance back in the day when I was a financial advisor. But then as I started teaching other advisors like how they all worked, and they would ask good questions saying, hey, what about this? What happens in this situation? I realized it blows up. Well, whole life was never on my radar as a financial advisor. I used to poo-poo all over it. I used to tell people whole life sucks. You make 1 or 2% return is lame, which is actually true. It's totally lame. It's a boring product for one. And how most insurance agents sell it, it is like a 1 or 2% rate of return long-term. And the problem is there's a lot of insurance agents out there trying to sell you on this whole life insurance from a traditional standpoint. Infinite banking is different. And I would even say this, is that our method of max ROI, infinite banking, is even different than infinite banking. Infinite banking, the whole premise is this. It's kind of like what happened with Walt Disney. If you guys know the story, if you ever watched any documentaries on Walt Disney, he had already got Disneyland going. He had Ronald Reagan as his little MC there, his host, right? And Disneyland launched and became a great success. Unbeknownst to most people's, imaginations, it actually worked. It was a clean, alcohol-free park, right? Amusement park. Nobody thought that was possible back in that day. Well, Walt didn't want to take his next step. He wanted to build Disney World. Now, when he started privately, like having the different entities, corporate entities buying up land in a swamp called Orlando, of all places, back in those days, it was nothing. It was just swamplands. People didn't know why somebody was just going and buying up all this land. Well, Walt was doing it for Disney World, right? Well, the bank said, hey, we appreciate you doing Disneyland, and that's great. You had success there, but this park is way bigger, right? I don't think this is going to work. And so Walt Disney said, well, what do you need? They're like, you're going to have to put in your own skin in the game. So Walt said, how about my life insurance? And so he put in his whole life policies, what's called a cash value. There's a tax-free savings account inside of whole life that you can actually use. Either one, for getting leverage with the banks, or two, you can just cash it out and use it for whatever the heck you want. So that's what he did. He did that, was able to get the leverage off of it, was able to make money on it. The key with this is how we use infinite banking. It's not this long-term thing you have to build up over many years like most people teach, and they tell you, hey, you can buy your car with it or your house with it. Not at all. If you set it up right, this ends up being a very low-cost, high-returning type of savings account. It actually ends up paying for itself by the 3rd year. Not with most of the companies. It's usually like the 10th year before you finally saying, yay, now there's not a net cost. I'm finally getting a net gain on this thing. I'm trying to catch up. It's not like that. This thing actually breaks even where you have just as much cash as you put in by about the 5th or 6th year. But the key that you want to use it is this. One, it earns more than 0.nothing% with your bank, right? It pays anywhere from like at least 5 or 6% tax-free right now. Two, it's off the books. Like when I mentioned tax-free, it's like a Roth IRA. You're able to put money in, it comes out tax-free, it grows tax-free, you can pull it out tax-free, just like a Roth, but you don't have all the stupid 59.5 rule, age limit type things. You get the 10% penalty, you don't have all that. And you don't have the restrictions that Roth IRAs have where you have to try to dance around. Either you make too much money because your income's too high, or they won't let you put in more than $7,000 a year, that kind of crap. I can put in about as much as I want into these plans, allowing it to grow tax-free. So it's hidden from the IRS, but it's also hidden from lawsuits of creditors. In most states, including our state, the state of Utah, you can have millions of dollars in here. If somebody sues you, they can never get to this money. They can access your bank accounts, your checking accounts, all that stuff. They can't even access IRA money, but they cannot get to the money here. So you're able to keep it protected from lawsuits of creditors, protected from the IRS. But the cool thing is it still counts as a liquid reserve because you can access the cash whenever you need it. So when I go in for a mortgage with a bank, I don't even show them my bank statements anymore. I just send them a statement of my life insurance. And they say, great, that's a liquid reserve. Check. So I use it for that. The cool thing is it doesn't count against me when I try to have my kids go to college, because when they want to get financial aid, this does not count as an asset either. So it's hidden from financial aid too, in that sense. So you can, again, have millions of dollars in here, doesn't hurt your kids' chances for getting that scholarship or any kind of financial aid. So that's the cool part. But the part that really is awesome from an investor perspective is the double dip factor, right? You get to double dip on this money because here's what happens. As you're putting money in, and you can put money in on a regular basis. I recommend people just dump money in, but put money in on a regular basis. It gives you a better ROI. So say that you're putting in, say like $40,000 a year, right? That's the max you can contribute, but you're only required to put in like $8,000 a year. You're putting in $40,000 a year. Say you built it up to like $100,000. Now, if you built up $100,000 inside your savings account, and then you found an investment for say, $50,000, right? You would say, all right, well, I'm just going to cash out that $50,000 from my savings account and I'm just going to invest it. Well, great. Well, now your savings account went down to $50,000. You're earning less interest at your 0.nothing% that you then get taxed on. But with the life insurance, when you have the $100,000, you have the option to take it out as a line of credit with the insurance company or even with the bank, but it doesn't show up on your credit. So it's a total private loan off the books, right? It's just with the insurance company. Your $100,000 is still intact, still earning that tax-free 5 or 6% tax-free return, all of it compounding, but you're able to get that same $50,000, lend against it, right? Get that line of credit against it, invest it. So you're still making money here in your investment, and you're still making more compounding interest over here. In essence, even if you made a 10% return on the investment, guess what? You're adding at least a 1, 2, 3+% return over here as well at the same time. So you end up making money in two places at once. So that's the kind of the key factors that, again, you don't need infinite banking to become financially free. You can just invest your cash like most of us have done, right? But if you want to do it a little bit faster by getting a little extra oomph, a little extra gasoline or, a little nitrogen thrown into your gasoline there, right? Just kind of get that little extra return. You can actually use your life insurance policy to get that double dip effect.
Chris, this sounds amazing. Are there limitations that we should be talking about?
Well, yeah, one limitation I mentioned, you put in about whatever you want. It's generally about 25% of your stated gross annual income. So like I have a client where, he's a syndicator, on his tax returns. If you look at the IRS, the tax returns will say he makes like $25,000 a year because he writes off everything because he has so much bonus depreciation and everything from his apartment buildings and whatnot. Right. But in reality, he makes pretty much about $1 million. So instead of trying to do it based on tax returns, which they would say, well, you don't have enough money. We just said, great, what's your money coming in? He said, I'm making $1 million a year. He claimed it, signed off on it, said, I'm making $1 million a year. They say, great, you can put in $250,000 a year is what you can put in as a max. So he's doing that. That's the cool thing, right? But there is still limits. You can't go above it. I had one client want to put away 50% of her income because she's, a lot of my Asian clients are like that. They can put away a lot of money. Well, they won't. They're like, we can't believe that you can live off 50% of your income. So we won't let you do that. So there are some limitations sometimes, but the other limitation too is if you're over the age of 70, I pretty much wouldn't recommend doing this kind of strategy. You would just more do it for estate planning purposes. Also, if you're in bad health, I had one client, he was a dentist. He was actually selling off his practice. He was able to become financially independent from real estate. but he was in his mid 50s, but he weighed like 400 pounds. So he just said, Chris, I already know I'm not going to get it. Even if I get qualified, it's not going to be looking very good. The costs are going to kill my ROI. I said, well, that's fine. Like, you have at least some crappy term insurance on yourself? Yeah, great. We're going to get it on your wife instead. So we put the policy on his wife, who was younger, and women live longer. So they actually get a better ROI than us men do. Even if you're the same age and great health, the women always win. I said, we're going to put it on your wife instead. They started putting in like $110,000 a year into her policy. And they've been doing that ever since. And he's been using that to actually invest in various real estate activities, even some oil and gas for himself as well. So there's all kinds of ways you can do it. You can put it on your kids. The cool thing, like 529 plans, people hate them because when they use them, they realize, oh, I'm losing money with the stock market. That would suck if the market goes down right before my kid goes to college, right? Well, they use this instead, because here you control the money and you can give it to them later on, or you can say, I'll just keep it for myself, right? You can just keep the money and pocket it. Or if they even don't go to college, which the one criticism of the 529 plan is you can only use it for college. What if your kid becomes an entrepreneur? What if they decide to go in a vocational trade? What if they decide actually just to get married or whatever? Great. You can use that money for whatever the heck you want, right? You can literally blow it in Vegas and the insurance company won't care because it's your money, right? You can do that kind of stuff. I don't recommend that, by the way. It's not my investment recommendations, blow it in Vegas. But I'm just saying you have so much freedom to do whatever you want with it. So people will often buy it, even do policy. I want to give it to them later, or just keep it for myself.
Go back 10 seconds. You cut out.
Yeah, did it cut out there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of times people could say, well, do I want to put on my kid? Well, you could put on your kid and decide later down the road, do you want to give it to them as a gift, turn over ownership to them, or just keep it for yourself and just cash it for yourself?
Very interesting. So that's how you get a double dip. You said there's a way to get a triple dip. What's that?
Yeah. Well, when we're talking off the air, we're talking about using it for business purposes, right? Because if you're a business owner, or even if you have a side business, if you have an LLC set up and you're doing something there, if you're using this money that you're, pulling out, right? You're using this money to go and use for a business purpose. For example, maybe you're a marketing company. You want to use it to help amp up your marketing. You're putting it into a bunch of Google ads or whatever it might be. Well, great. Well, normally if you use a credit card to go do those kind of expenses through your business, not only do you write off the expense, but you write off the interest that you're being charged by the credit card company, right? No different here. You get charged interest from the insurance company too, and so if you're getting charged interest from the insurance company, you're able to write that interest off while you're also still getting paid interest from the insurance company, which is higher than what you're even writing off. So now you're paying this very low, basically you're not even paying interest, essentially. You're essentially getting paid interest and you're still making money off that business investment, whatever you're putting it into. And in fact, if you go back in history, many companies have done it, not for the tax benefit, but this is a nice benefit of why they used it. JCPenney's during the Great Depression couldn't make payroll. They borrowed from their own policies to pay payroll, right? Pampered Chef. If you guys ever used that before, we got several items in our kitchen. If you ever used Pampered Chef, that company was started. The seed money was actually started by them borrowing from their life insurance policy. And so the cool thing is, even when they borrowed that, they're going to make this to a multi-billion-dollar business. At the same time, they're also writing off all the interest they were actually paying on it in the first place. So it's really like it's not even a net 0% loan. It's like net negative interest rate loan for them.
That's awesome.
That's cool. It's almost like the bonus depreciation where you're getting a write-off on a building that's going down in value, even though you're upgrading it and pushing it up in value and getting a tax write-off for it.
It's like depreciating the depreciation, right?
Exactly. It's kind of a big load of information. How would that look if you were to do a bonus depreciation on an apartment? Would you actually get a quadruple dip?
That's interesting. Yeah, you could. Well, I know even when I buy turnkey properties, if I use this as well, same thing, right? Now, granted, if it's done through an LLC, if it's actually a business expense, then yes, you can write it off. Typically, though, it just depends on what you're doing. But if you're doing that kind of doing that kind of business anyways, you got business expenses, you normally be writing off interest anyways. Yeah, you'd be able to write off interest here, and then you're still depreciating the properties, and then you're getting the bonus depreciation as long as it stays in effect, right? We don't know what's going to happen with that, but take advantage of it while you can. Yeah, I mean, you're getting so many tax advantages there. I mean, it's just like it. And not to mention, I mean, we didn't even talk about the fact that even if you did have to pay interest, right? Even if you did have a net positive interest, let's just say you paid an extra 0.5% interest, difference. Who cares if inflation's like 6, 7? Well, really, we know it's more than that percent. That's just what the government reports. We know it's like double whatever the government says. So if we know that inflation is really 10% plus, guys, we're literally killing it. We're able to make so much more money than what's going on. Like we would want to finance things just for that reason alone, which is why the government also wants to finance things. That's why they never try to pay off their debt. Everybody's like whining about them trying to raise the debt ceiling. It's like, you realize they never want to pay off their debt. They know that interest rates will always be lower than whatever inflation is. They're going to milk it for all they can get because they know they have future, spending that's available because of inflation going up higher than their interest rate. So they know they're just never going to pay it off. It's just bad business to do so.
Roger, I've got more questions. Do you?
Go ahead.
Chris, I know that you've got a lot of experience coaching and teaching people how to improve their finances. If someone was just getting started trying to improve their finances, what would you say is like the first thing they should be focusing on?
First thing is really focus on cash flow, right? And I mean personal cash flow. So start tracking your money, right? Monitor exactly how much is coming in, how much is going out. If money is going out, that's going to stuff that's just a waste of money, get rid of it, right? I call them destructive expenses that just aren't worth it. That could be memberships or subscriptions that you're no longer using, right? It's going to waste. If you have that gym membership but you don't go to the gym, just cancel it, save that $25 or whatever, I'm not saying you have to like get rid of all your lattes every single day. Like, some people teach about the latte factor, right? Or live on rice and beans, like some people claim. You don't have to be cheap. But it does mean like really being a wise steward of your money, trying to get as much cash flow as you can have come in, focus on trying to generate more income. Because when you're just starting out, like everybody's like, I got $1,000 now. Where do I invest it? In education, maybe, but nowhere. Like save it, keep going. Because you make 10% on $1,000, like, wow, you made $10. Who cares? Or $100, I guess, almost $10 a month, right? But $100, that's not going to make or break you. That's not going to make you rich. Your economic engine is you as an income producer, which is you figuring out how do you create the most value for people? How do you show up and serve people, solve problems for them? That is your number one economic engine to make money in any economy, no matter what. Focus on value creation first, then start trying to be a wise steward, keep, tracking your money, make sure that you have money coming in, money going out. That's not as much, right? Doing those kind of things, find ways to save on taxes, even if it means create a side business or side hustle, paying off debt. I mean, especially right now, the average interest rate on a credit card is 24%. So, I mean, even if you think you can make 10, 15, 20% on investment, who cares? Pay off that credit card, get rid of it, like get your finances down to a point where you've got a nice and tight, lean and mean, saving machine. And then you start to build that savings. Then once you hit, like, I would say after 100,000 or so, then let's start talking about investing in some of these things that we've been talking about. But until then, I mean, just focus on creating value, earning in more income, being a wise steward of your expenses, paying off debt, and of course, saving money. And of course, you can use the infinite banking to help you save your way up to that too. But, really that's the focus, is just focus on saving and earning more income.
I love how it's so simple, Chris. Like all of those things you just said, people can easily do if they're willing to put the time and energy into it. So
absolutely. I mean, you mentioned before, like we went on the air, like that little teaser on the hook, like how was I able to get out of $1 million plus debt hole, right? I mean, that actually happened after I became financially independent. That was actually during the last recession. I went into the hole. And a lot of the things I just shared here was because I didn't do it. For example, I mean, when money comes in so abundantly, it's almost like air. You never count the number of breaths you take in a day until all of a sudden the air is taken away and you're counting every single breath, right? It's the same thing with money too. I remember in 2007, we had a business that I launched with a guy named Garrett Gunderson, that wrote the book, Killing Sacred Cows. We partnered up on a business together, and we were focusing on real estate investors, but mainly flippers. And if in the last recession, flippers got just destroyed because all of a sudden things started depreciating. It didn't matter if they bought it with equity, it was gone by the time they finally fixed the property up. So they were getting just beat up left and right. So our business was just failing. It was barely hanging on. I mean, he even asked me, he's like, I don't know. He's like, he was getting paid to be there. I wasn't. There's many times I went months without a paycheck. He's like, I don't even know why you show up. I'm like, because this is where I need to be, at that time. And, eventually we pulled out of that. But a lot of that experience, that ability to get resourceful is what got me to teaching some of those very basic things. I even have a book on my website called Beyond Rice and Beans, 7 Secrets to Free Up Cash Today, which is about the very things I learned to help myself get out of that hole. Things like starting to track my money, right? Paying off debt. And I actually don't always go for the highest interest, just so you know. I have an equation called a cash flow index that I take the balance of the loan divided by the monthly payment, and I pay the lowest number index, or essentially the one that gives me the highest ROI on my cash flow, right? So I have that kind of formula that I use, for paying off debt, and things like that. Different things that I get rid of multiple insurances that you don't need, and, ways to, just really find ways to create more income. Those are all things that I had to do during that period of time to avoid bankruptcy. I should have gone bankrupt. It would have been easier going bankrupt, because I'll tell you, I mean, I was like, it was mess. It was horrible. I had collectors calling multiple times a day. My friends stopped calling, but man, those collectors just kept on calling. So I started calling them I love you calls, because at least they loved me enough to call me. My friends just scattered when there was no more money there, right? So that's the thing, is that, you can recontextualize, really change that mindset and get a lot of things working. But one thing I am grateful for is that from what I learned from that experience, I stopped teaching people how to get out of the rat race during that period of time, because I was back in it. So I started teaching people how to find and free up money, which is what I was doing. What's amazing is that there's literally, almost 1,000 people that have improved their cash flow by well over $300 million in the last 13 years since I really started teaching that. So very grateful that it's not just blessed my life and got me back to become a multimillionaire and financially independent in 2016, but it's blessed so many others' lives and got them to do the same as well.
Great story, Chris. Thank you for sharing that. I was so involved. I don't even have a follow-up question.
I've got 2 takeaways from that. One is, this podcast was spurred by my fiance, who said, how are we going to invest, and could we get a whole life policy and start growing money that way? And so I created the Facebook post that created this interaction, and the things that you said were almost as if you were in the room answering that question directly to Bonnie. The other thing
Hi,
is,
Bonnie.
She can almost hear you. Good morning. Oh, the other thing is if you don't feel loved, borrow some money, don't pay it back, then you'll feel the love.
Let's not air that.
Let's do.
That's true.
It's like when we have some things that we don't say, and Earl says them. And so the one podcast that was foundational, we did a couple of foundational where we talk about basic things that you'll need to know throughout this podcast. We put them in the first few, and then also kind of our history and biography. And Earl said, I'd just like to have skipped my children and gone straight to grandchildren. And I'm like, let's not say that. And Earl said, no, let's do. I'm like, no. That's not only
it's tempting, though.
It's not only not evergreen, it's also hurtful. We're going to lose 8 listeners with that comment.
Hey, Roger.
Hey, I have 8 kids with a blended family, and there are times man, do they ever grow up? Some people say, oh, they grow up so fast. I'm like, I feel like I've been a parent for my entire life. My oldest is now 19 years old, and it still feels like it's been forever. It feels like I've never done anything in my adult life except raise children. So I'm kind of excited for that next step of empty nesting grandchildren that you can send home again, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Bonnie and I have 8 children also. So when we get married, we'll have the 8 children, and this will be my first time with girls. This will be my first time with teenage girls. And also we're going to be celebrating the oldest at 26. So, and it's actually 26 tonight. So we're doing a big get together, and we've got a 9-pound pork shoulder that we're cooking, sweet pulled pork, and
you're gonna make us all hungry, Roger.
It's a lot of fun. It's really like, having doubled your family. It's even more than doubled, and it's really cool.
Well, Ben, do you have a bunch of kids too?
I have only 2 children. I'm a little bit younger than Roger. We wouldn't mind more kids, but you never know what life will bring you, right?
See, we could literally like move our 3 families to some township in Pennsylvania and triple the population of that town. I mean, we could just take it over with our little village,
Sounds like fun. Chris, I'm sure we could listen to you talk for a long time. We want to be respectful of your time. Roger, do you have other questions you would like to ask Chris, or should we jump into the final 4?
Let's jump into the final 4.
Chris, was there anything else you wanted to cover as far as infinite baking? Anything about general financial advice we could be sharing with our audience?
Yeah, we'll do the disclaimer. I mean, don't take my word for it. Don't try to invest just because we say it. Everybody's situation is different. I think that's the beauty of it, is that what I've learned over the years of coaching literally hundreds and hundreds of people is that everybody's situation is different. Everybody has their own magic formula, and no one's a one size fits all for the strategy that gets you, 1, financially independent, or 2, even trying to double dip on your money. Everybody has a different way of doing it. And so just know that, there is no like secret carbon copy recipe. If somebody ever gives you that, they're selling you. Okay. You want something that's customized to you and done the right way. And I'll tell you, financial independence, having done it twice, where I have enough passive income that can cover all my expenses, I will tell you it is easier and there's more hope than you might think. That's the one thing I will definitely have you leave that impression upon you, is that it can be done. It's not about working harder. And it's not even just about working smarter. You can watch these podcasts all day long, but ultimately it's about working right, doing the right things the right way, in the right timing, and you'll get awesome results.
Well, and with that, Chris, it's being willing to put the time in to learn it and put it into action, right?
Yep. That's right. It's not just being a hearer of the words, being a doer as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Chris. Roger, do you want to do the final 4, or do you want me to?
Give me one quick second. I've been wanting to do this for a minute and unblur my background, and then I get the. Can we do that?
Nice.
There's always like a way you can promote yourself or miss the way you can promote yourself. And a lot of times we skip the pictures and we forget to, and people will be like, dang it, we should have gotten a photo. Or I give Emma Powell, who's a friend of all of ours, so much, because there was a big, what do you call it? There was a big meetup at Adam Adams' event, and we had a really good dinner, and she had actually taken a bite of her dinner and then took a picture of it and then posted on Facebook. And I'm like, you took a bite of it. That ruins the picture. You can't do that. And she's like, no, I was opening up the steak so you could see the color and everything. I'm like, no, you ate a piece of it. You missed the opportunity. You shouldn't have tried. Me and Emma have such a great story. It's fun. And I give, I think, 4 different things that we just constantly joke about. One is Troy has the same minivan as her, but he's a racer because he has Cadillac rims on it. One time he came into the parking lot and he screeched his wheels. And I'm like, who is this crazy? And it turns out it's Troy in the minivan that had kind of jumped a curb, jumped a gutter. And when he hit the other side, it screeched the wheels like an airplane landing. So I always joke about racing him, So,
that's awesome.
Anyways, let's do the final 4. Why don't you do it, Ben?
Chris, it's now time for the final 4. These are questions we like to ask every one of our guests. So without further ado, let's jump into the final 4. Chris, we want to know what your favorite business book is.
My favorite business book, oh man, I'm going to be split a little bit, but it's both by the same author. The author is Mike Michalowicz, if you've heard of him. I actually had him on my show, interviewed last year. Great guy. If you're just starting out, I would recommend reading Profit First. That's a great one. It's almost like what I was talking about for the personal financial aspect, but applying it to your business, right? Essentially, if you're ever a business owner that says, I'm not getting paid, in fact, I have employees making more money than me, you need to read Profit First, right? Great book. But I'll say if you're already into it a little bit, you're already past that stage. My favorite book of his is actually called The Pumpkin Plan. And the Pumpkin Plan talks about, have you ever seen those prize winning pumpkins on the news? They're like massive, massive pumpkins weighing like thousands of pounds. Those guys actually buy seeds from like Nova Scotia. They get like these perfect seeds. They'll pay up to $100,000 to get these seeds, plant them in hopes that it'll grow these special breed of pumpkin that can grow to be giant pumpkins. Well, as it grows, you don't just let all the pumpkins on the vine grow. You start chopping off the smallest pumpkins until you just leave one big pumpkin being fed by one vine. Same thing with our business is that many times we get distracted and we're going and doing all these different things. I myself, actually, when I was going through a divorce back in 2015, I found out that my business was owning me in a lot of ways, right? And when I started to cut off the things that were not productive activities, I went from 50 hours a week down to about 5 or 10 hours a week, and I doubled my business revenue. So it's great book to read, especially if you feel like you're just spinning your wheels.
Thank you. We should check out both of those. Chris, the second question is, we want to know what brings you happiness.
For me, it's really about teaching, serving. That's why I'm doing these podcasts, right? I obviously don't have to do this. I don't even have to run a business, for that matter. But for me, it's about, I feel like I'm given these God-given, blessings and abilities and things like that. And I feel like it's really a duty for me. It's like Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. It's kind of the same thing. I feel the same pull, the same duty to be able to serve and help people. And so that's what actually gives me joy to wake up every day. Retiring, which I've done twice, does not give me joy. I get bored. I lose fire. As opposed to people burning out from working too hard, I would fizzle out from not working enough. So I like to have that perfect balance of part-time work and really a full-time mission.
Great answers there. And that hurts my next question, though, because we want to know what your future retirement looks like. But maybe you're not going to be retiring.
Yeah, that's kind of what my retirement's become, right? I've actually become less retired in the last couple of years than I had when I was more retired. But I will say this is that I've definitely been building my company and structuring it in a way that's firing myself. For a long time, I was kind of like the one-man show. Just, I even did my own podcast editing and everything else. And now I'm hiring people to do that for me. And I'm hiring people to, essentially help run my business so that I'm not always the one doing it. Because I did run into a certain situation a few years ago where either I was going to turn people away and say, sorry, I can't help you. Or after they say, no, I can help more people, but I need more people to help me to do that. So that's kind of what I've evolved into now, is more becoming that teacher and that leader inside my company versus the do-it-yourselfer.
Well, and that leads into my next question. So what do you think is the best way to give back, Chris?
To get what?
What is the best way to give back?
Oh, to give back? I think just using your God-given time, abilities, talents, passions, given that in the service of others. That's really what it is. I think that's the best way to give back. Nobody wants you to give back with things you suck at, right? Like, I've never seen so many people say like, well, I don't want to use my gifts and abilities to serve people because that can seem bad, because God gave me these gifts. Like, if God gave you those gifts, you better dang well use it. Like, it's the parable of the talents, right? Like, you got to use the gifts you've been given to help serve others. And so use it, use those experiences. If you've had bad experiences like I had, where I was a financial advisor recovering, right? I was somebody who went over $1 million in debt and had to come out of that. Like, those experiences help serve people that might be in the same situation, or maybe not even as bad. And that kind of empathy that you can show up with and help guide people along is what I think makes this world a better place. Man, imagine what it would be like if everybody focused on serving other people and just giving of their best of themselves. If everybody did that on this planet, we wouldn't have nearly all the crap and the drama and the wars that we have today.
And you're a great example of that, Chris, because you've got several hundred videos online of just teaching people how to be better with their money. So, that's a follow-up question of that, Chris, is what's the best way for our audience to find you or reach out to you online or on social media?
Yeah, best way to do that is go to moneyripples.com. That's where our website is. We have lots of content on there. Or if you're a YouTuber, you can always just check out, Money Ripples, the Money Ripples channel there. We've got tons of videos and content, and all of our social media is at Money Ripples.
We'll have all those details on our show notes. I wanted to comment that I love the name of your company, Money Ripples. I think it's a great mental image of what money can do for you if you use it correctly.
It's true. Yep. If I wouldn't have been going out for a run, that little inspiration would have come to me. And, here it is today.
That's wonderful.
Speaking of running, congratulations on being invited to the New York Marathon.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited for that one. I'm excited to run through the boroughs and stuff for the very first time in my life. I've always just gone around New York City, and now I actually get to run through it in slow motion versus being in a car in slow motion. I guess it's more fun to run through the city, huh?
That's awesome.
That's great. We ready for the closeout?
I am, unless Chris has anything else.
I'm good.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Retire Wealthy and Happy podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Hope you got value from this episode. And if you have a minute, then take the time to leave an honest written review for the podcast, because we take those reviews seriously and it'll help us serve you better on the next episodes. And most importantly, be sure to start taking action so you can control your financial future today.